On a cold, wind-swept rainy evening outside the Sterling Corporate Tower in downtown Billings, Montana, an old man sat shivering against the granite wall. His canvas coat was torn at the elbows. His boots were split at the seams. His beard was wild, matted with mud and rain, and he had spent 2 days sitting on that wet concrete without a single warm meal. Dozens of executives in $4,000 suits stepped out of the glass doors above him, glanced down with disgust, and pulled their umbrellas tighter as they walked past. To them, he was invisible. He was just another piece of urban street trash cluttering the entrance of a $100 million corporate empire. Then the side service door opened. A 36-year-old custodian named Keziah Calloway stepped out at the end of her 12-hour shift. She wore a dark blue facility uniform with a brass name badge pinned to her chest, her natural curly black hair gathered into a neat high bun. Her hands were tired. Her feet ached. But when her dark brown eyes caught sight of the old man shivering in the freezing rain, she did not walk past. Keziah set her bag down. She opened her personal insulated lunch container, knelt on the wet asphalt directly in front of him, and split her warm container of beef stew and fresh cornbread in half. She handed him a spoon and said, quietly, "Eat this while it's still hot. The cold gets into your bones if you let it." The old man looked at the container, then lifted his head. His eyes were not dull or broken. They were a piercing steel gray, sharp and observant. Before he could take a single bite, the main glass doors of the tower swung open. Garrick Sterling, the 34-year-old executive vice president of the company, walked out wearing a tailored trench coat, flanked by Holden, the tower's chief of corporate security. Garrick stopped, looked down at the scene on the sidewalk, and his face twisted with contempt. He looked at Holden and shouted, "Holden, get this filthy vagrant off our sidewalk immediately, and fire this janitor on the spot for bringing street trash onto corporate grounds." Keziah stood up slowly. She placed herself squarely between the security guards and the old man. She looked Garrick in the eyes and said, "He isn't bothering anyone, sir. He's an elderly man shivering in the freezing rain." Garrick sneered, "You're done here. Security, throw them both off the property." Holden reached out to grab Keziah's arm. That was when the old man stood up. He didn't rise like a broken vagrant. He straightened his spine to his full 6'2" height, brushing the rain from his coat with a movement so calm and grounded that Holden's hand froze in midair. The old man stepped past Keziah, looked Garrick dead in the eyes, and spoke in a voice that cut through the wind like a rifle shot. He said, "You always did have a terrible eye for value, Garrick. You don't even recognize your own blood." Garrick's smile vanished. His face went completely pale, because under the mud, under the matted beard, and under the torn canvas coat, Garrick was looking at Callum Sterling, the billionaire owner of the entire company, the man whose name was carved in gold letters on the building behind them. But to understand why a Montana cattle billionaire spent 2 weeks living on the wet streets outside his own corporate tower, we have to go back to where the breach began. Callum Sterling was 58 years old, and he was born on the Sterling Heritage Ranch outside Bozeman, Montana. His family had run cattle across the Gallatin Valley for 4 generations, building a $100 million agricultural and mineral land trust out of sweat, land stewardship, and unshakable frontier honor. Cal was a man carved from the land itself. He wore a dark leather cowboy hat, drove a dusty pickup truck, and believed that a man's word was his fence line. If you gave your word, you kept it, no matter how much it cost you. When Cal's younger brother passed away 10 years ago, Cal took his nephew, Garrick, into his home. Cal paid for Garrick's education and eventually appointed him to oversee corporate asset management from the company's regional tower in Billings. Cal believed in family. He assumed Garrick carried the same frontier values that 4 generations of Sterlings had bled for. Therefore, Cal gave Garrick near total authority over the financial accounts in Billings. Before we go back to what Cal found when he looked into those corporate accounts, take a moment and tell us in the comments what town or city you're watching from today. And if you believe that every action carries a consequence, hit that subscribe button and join our community before the next case opens. Garrick Sterling did not share his uncle's love for the land. He saw the Bozeman Ranch not as a sacred family trust, but as an ancient dinosaur sitting on top of liquid capital. Garrick wanted $3,000 suits, luxury sports cars, and high-stakes real estate deals in Denver and Seattle. Therefore, 3 years ago, Garrick began quietly orchestrating a massive corporate breach. He forged Cal's signature on land use permits, created shell entities registered in Delaware, and siphoned over $4 million out of the ranch's pension and operational funds. But Garrick's ultimate scheme was even larger. He negotiated a secret, illegal contract with a predatory energy consortium to sell off 5,000 acres of prime Bozeman pastureland for industrial strip mining, a deal that would permanently poison the local water table and ruin the family legacy. To execute the sale without Cal stopping him, Garrick drafted legal petitions to have Cal declared mentally incapacitated, planning to present them to a hand-picked corporate board on a Tuesday evening in Billings. 3 weeks before that board vote, Cal's longtime ranch foreman in Bozeman noticed irregularities in the county land registry notices. He brought them to Cal. Cal looked at the forged filings and recognized his nephew's hand immediately. A lesser man would have called the police or hired a team of high-priced Denver attorneys. But Cal was a product of the frontier. He knew that lawyers could be bought and corporate paper could be hidden. He wanted to know the absolute truth. He wanted to see who in his Billings corporate headquarters was loyal to the land, and who was complicit in his nephew's betrayal. Therefore, Cal announced to his ranch staff that he was taking a 2-week backcountry hunting trip deep in the Absarica wilderness, completely off the grid. He didn't go to the mountains. Cal drove his old pickup to a small town outside Billings, parked it in a secondary lot, and bought secondhand clothes from a thrift shop. He let his gray beard grow wild, rubbed dirt into his canvas jacket, matted his hair, and walked into downtown Billings carrying a single canvas sack. For 10 days, Callum Sterling sat on the concrete curb outside the main entrance of the Sterling corporate tower. He sat through wind, rain, and cold mountain nights. He watched his executives walk past him without a glance. He heard senior managers standing near the glass doors laughing about the old cowboy in Bozeman, who was about to lose his empire. He watched Chief of Security Holden physically push poor people off the sidewalk. He saw the cold, hollow rot that had taken over the company he built. Out of 400 employees who worked in that glass tower, only one person ever treated him like a human being. Her name was Keziah Calloway. Keziah was 36 years old, a single mother raising her 9-year-old daughter, Amara, in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Billings. Keziah worked 12-hour night shifts cleaning 6 floors of glass offices at the Sterling Tower, then went home to prepare her daughter for school before taking online classes toward her pediatric nursing degree. She worked until her hands were raw, because she believed in building a future rooted in self-respect and honest labor. Keziah had no idea who the old man on the curb was. She didn't know he owned the building, the land beneath it, or the company whose offices she sanitized every night. She simply saw an elder sitting in the cold. On Cal's second night on the street, Keziah walked out the service door at midnight, sat on the wet concrete beside him, and handed him a hot mug of tea and a slice of homemade cornbread. She said, "You don't have to talk if you don't want to, but nobody should sit in the dark without something warm." Every night after that, Keziah brought him half of her dinner. She brought him thick wool socks she had knitted herself. She sat with him on the cold pavement during her 15-minute breaks, talking about her daughter Amara, her nursing classes, and her late grandmother, who had taught her that true wealth is measured by how much dignity you give to people who can do nothing for you in return. Cal sat beside her in silence, eating warm stew, feeling the fierce, quiet honor of this young mother. In a building filled with millionaires who had lost their souls, the janitor in the Navy uniform was the richest person on the block. Which brings us back to that Tuesday evening outside the tower entrance. Garrick Sterling stood in the freezing rain, his $4,000 trench coat drenched, his jaw slack as he stared at the old man he had just ordered security to throw onto the street. Holden, the security chief, took 2 steps back, his face turning pale as he realized he was looking at the founder of the company. Garrick stammered, "Uncle Cal, what is this? What kind of ridiculous game are you playing?" Cal didn't yell. He didn't raise his fist. He reached into his wet canvas sack and pulled out a sealed, waterproof leather folder. Inside that folder were the original master land deeds, the forensic audit of the $4 million Garrick had siphoned, and recorded phone transcripts of Garrick's negotiations with the Energy Consortium. Cal looked at Garrick and said, "I came here to see if my brother's son had any honor left. I sat on this sidewalk for 2 weeks, Garrick. I watched you walk past me 7 times. I watched you step over an old man in the rain. And tonight, I watched you fire the only person in this entire building who understands what the word Sterling used to mean." Garrick tried to step forward, his voice rising in panic. "Uncle Cal, listen to me. I did what I had to do for the growth of the firm. You're an old rancher who doesn't understand modern corporate structure. Hand me those files, and we can discuss this in private." Cal looked at Holden. "Chief Holden." Holden stood straight, his hands trembling. "Yes, Mr. Sterling," Cal said. "Take my nephew's corporate badge, confiscate his phone, and escort him to the executive suite on the 9th floor. He will remain there under your personal guard until the state police arrive." Garrick shouted. "Holden, don't touch me. I pay your salary." Holden looked at Garrick, then looked at Callum Sterling. Holden said, "No, sir. Mr. Sterling pays all of our salaries." 2 security guards stepped forward, took Garrick by the arms, and led him crying into the glass doors of the tower. Cal turned to Keziah Calloway. Keziah was standing on the wet pavement, holding her lunchbox, completely stunned. Cal reached out his weathered hand, took her hand gently, and said, "Keziah, pick up your container. You're coming upstairs with me." The next morning at 8 o'clock, the emergency board meeting was convened in the grand boardroom on the 9th floor of the Sterling Corporate Tower. The room was filled with board members, senior corporate attorneys, and major agricultural investors. They were expecting Garrick Sterling to present a motion declaring his uncle unfit. Instead, the heavy oak doors opened, and Callum Sterling walked into the room. He wasn't wearing his dirty canvas coat. He wore a crisp, bespoke charcoal western suit, polished cattleman's boots, and his dark leather cowboy hat. His gray beard was neatly trimmed, and his steel-gray eyes commanded the entire room. Beside him, dressed in a simple, immaculate dark blazer, sat Keziah Calloway as his guest of honor. Cal walked to the head of the table, set his leather hat on the polished mahogany surface, and looked down the long line of board members. For 90 minutes, Cal laid out the truth. He presented the forensic audit, the forged land leases, and the paper trail connecting Garrick to the offshore accounts. He exposed every senior manager who had assisted Garrick in the embezzlement. Before the meeting concluded, for officers from the Montana State Highway Patrol and federal financial investigators entered the boardroom. Garrick Sterling was escorted out of his own corporate headquarters in handcuffs, facing multiple felony counts of grand larceny, corporate fraud, and embezzlement. His luxury vehicles were seized, his accounts were frozen, and his reputation in the Pacific Northwest was completely destroyed. Then, Callum Sterling turned his attention to the board. He looked at the men in suits and said, "This company was built on the belief that human beings matter. We forgot that. We let paper and greed turn this tower into a cold house. That ends today." Cal announced 3 sweeping structural changes. First, he appointed Keziah Calloway as the new Director of Corporate Ethics and Employee Welfare for the Sterling Enterprise, establishing a position that came with a 6-figure salary, full executive authority, and an office on the top floor. Second, he established the Calloway Single Parent Healthcare Scholarship Fund, fully paying for the nursing school tuition and living expenses of 50 single mothers across Montana every single year. Third, he ordered an immediate 40% wage increase and a full medical benefits package for every custodian, maintenance worker, and security guard working across all Sterling properties. The boardroom erupted into standing applause. Keziah sat in her chair, tears streaming down her face, as the board members who had once stepped past her on the street now lined up to shake her hand. 6 months later, the sun was setting over the snow-capped mountain peaks of the Gallatin Valley outside Bozeman, Montana. Callum Sterling stood on the wide wooden porch of his ranch house, holding a mug of black coffee. Beside him stood Keziah Calloway, holding a clipboard with her final nursing exam results. She had passed with top honors. In the yard below the porch, Keziah's 9-year-old daughter, Amara, was laughing as she ran through the green pasture grass with 2 young quarter-horse colts. Cal looked out at his 12,000 acres of untouched mountain pasture land, then looked at Keziah. He said, "You know, Keziah, my nephew thought he could take this land because he had a gold pin and a suit. He forgot that you can't fake dirt and you can't fake character." Keziah smiled, looking at her daughter playing in the golden evening light. She said, "My grandmother used to tell me that when you give kindness to someone who can't repay you, you're investing in a bank that never fails." Cal nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "Your grandmother was a wise woman, Keziah. That bank paid out full interest." Some people spend their entire lives trying to climb over others, believing that power is measured by the height of the tower they sit in. They forget that real power is quiet. Real power is grounded in the soil, in the promises you keep, and in the dignity you offer to a stranger when you think nobody is watching. The people who judge your kindness as weakness usually don't know they are writing the ending you'll survive. If you stayed until the end, thank you. More stories from Breach and Balance are already on your screen. Click one now. And if you haven't subscribed yet, don't miss what's coming next. See you there.